Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay.
Can hear you now.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany. I am the executive assistant here at Save Barnegat Bay. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just about to get this presentation started with our communications and outreach coordinator, Alec Boss. I'll have him introduce himself in a few minutes. I just want to wait probably 2:05 to get started to see if anyone else is joining in. But thank you, and we look forward to presenting this to you.
So you already have 10 people in the session. That's great. How are you, folks? I'm really excited to bring this presentation to you all. It's one of my favorite things to talk about and a little bit of my bread and butter. So I'm really happy to share some good tips and tricks with you all in a little bit. Nice to see someone with their camera on. Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for coming. We're just going to wait a little bit, see if there's anyone else trickling in, but we're going to be beginning shortly.
Okay, it is 2:05. Looks like we got a few new people. So I'll just reintroduce myself. Hello, everybody. My name is Brittany McLaughlin, and I am the executive assistant here at Safe Barnegat Bay. This program is part of our student grant program. Goal of this talk is to empower students and people in professional and science fields going into the field or who are already in the field, learn how to communicate their science and communicate the important work they're doing with the general public. We will be the person hosting this presentation will be Alec Boss, our communications and outreach coordinator. I'll allow him to introduce himself in a few moments. But thank you all for coming. We are so excited to have you here. And while Alec is giving the presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please write them into the chat. I'll be monitoring them and I will facilitate a Q&A when Alec is done with this presentation. But thank you, everybody.
Hi, folks. Brittany, thank you so much for that introduction. So like Brittany said, my name is Alec Boss. I am the digital marketing and communication coordinator here at Save Barnegat Bay. I have the privilege today to share one of my favorite topics with you all, and that's communicating science to the general public. So the presentation is going to start off with some broad general concepts that are going to be really applicable and useful to a wide array of folks. And then as we get through into the presentation, the latter half is really going to be more in-depth, detail-specific stuff, specifically for communicating science. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Give me one second. Here we go. So I like to start off talking about the types of presentations. So there's two main types that I think are going to be really important and relevant to you all here, and that's extemporaneous and the elevator pitch, or sometimes referred to as the off-the-cuff speech. So an extemporaneous speech, put simply, is a presentation in which you're going to have some sort of speaking aid to help you with, like a PowerPoint like this, or maybe index cards. I've seen some people write some stuff on their hand, although I don't recommend that. It doesn't really look professional to be doing that. But what is not an extemporaneous speech is this. Extemporaneous, presentation in which a presenter has an aid of some. You're not going to be reading off the slides. As tempting as it is to have those aids behind you to help you with the presentation, it's primarily there for the benefit of the audience. You want to have a base level understanding of your work enough that if you do get off track, you can just simply glance at the PowerPoint or at your index cards to get right back on there. Now, the other one is the elevator pitch. Put simply, it is a short, completely memorized presentation that you have in the back pocket in your mind to give whenever the opportunity presents itself. Say you're in an elevator with your boss, and now this is the opportunity to ask him for the raise, and you're trying to give the reasons and credence as to why you deserve that. Or maybe you're with a professor and you're trying to get extra time on that presentation. You need to have something prepared. Now, the reason why I have these two in this presentation is that for the majority of you folks here who are going to be giving your student grant presentations to the public, or maybe interns or what have you, it's probably going to be some combination of the two, right? You're going to have your main presentation, which will be extemporaneous. You'll have your PowerPoint or posters or whatever aids you have. But then after that's all said and done, there's a really good likelihood that you're going to be approached by members of the public afterwards who want follow-up. At that point, you don't have anything else to go on. So you need to have some core bits committed to memory that you can then speak about. So, strategies for better presentations. So this is one of my favorite slides. I love getting to talk to people about this. So it's rate of speech, tone, and pauses. So if you see there, it says it's a Jersey thing. I never really watched the Jersey Shore, but I think that it's relevant for this presentation here. So did you know that the average rate of speech in the United States is 150 words a minute? Did you also know that the average rate of speech in New Jersey is as close to 300? Yeah, we like to talk fast, and it goes with that East Coast culture of if you're not first, you're last. You're expected to have an answer already ready the second that someone asks you a question. You're expected to be Johnny on the spot, and if you're not, it's almost seen as disrespectful or rude. I'm not saying that that is how it's supposed to be. I'm just saying that that's something that we see with this whole East Coast culture. But that obviously causes a lot of presentations if you have a mixed crowd. We don't want to be talking about this saying, that's a Jersey thing. Did you know the average rate of speech in the United States is 100? Because then people are going to be like, oh my God. You also don't want to be, did you know the average rate of speech in the United States is 100 and drive you crazy. So you need to find that balance. And the things that really help with that is understanding your cadence when you're speaking, understanding and being aware of your tone, and making use of pauses. And these are going to have great benefits, especially with anxiety where that's concerned. We're going to talk about that in the next couple of slides. So pauses. We want to leave room for our words to set in. And if you have a well-timed pause where you can let that stuff hang out, it's really going to be more impactful to the audience that's listening. And we also want to avoid that sing-song kind of thing that a lot of people do with their voice where they end on a high note. So here, I'll give you an example. You tell me in your head, or you can tell me in the Q&A after, which version of this story sounds better. So, when I first got into the adult world, right, and wanting to talk to people, or not even talk to people, but wanting to become a professional, I thought I was going to be a cop. Actually, I was even in the final selection process with the sheriff's office. Pretty neat, right? I was there and, I was like, I don't know if this is something that I want to do. I'm going to go back to school. And I went back to school. And when I went back there, I started to do more with communications, and I started to find my love and passion for communications. And I was able to find out that there's something called environmental communications. That, or, when I first started to get into the professional setting, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew as a kid I wanted to be a cop, and I made it to the final selection process with the sheriff's office, but I soon realized that this probably wasn't my thing. So I ended up going back to school, and it was a bit of an adventure, but when I got there, I found something really important: my voice. And it was there that I learned of something called environmental communications. And suddenly there was an aha moment. I was able to take my passion for being able to communicate to people and my love of the environment and bring them together. And now here I am with you all. You see the difference? There's no sing-songy up and down, the pauses for dramatic effect, if you will. It lets people know that, hey, this is something important that we need to take notice of. So, non-words and filler words and anxiety. So this is a direct continuation of rate of speech here. We all do these. I'm guilty of them. Heck, I might have even done some just now and didn't even realize it. But these are your ums, uhs, well, right? Heck, some people can string all of these together in one sentence of nothing but filler words. This happens because our mouth gets too fast for our brain to catch up. And again, it goes back to that cultural thing where if you're not first, you're last, or you're somehow being disrespectful by not preserving someone else's time. And the result is it tends to devalue the credibility of your work. Not always, but it makes it seem less professional than it actually is. So how do we fix it? Well, the answer that everyone hates that is right most of the time for just about everything is practice. But don't worry, I have some tips that will help and maybe give you a edge, when you're doing this practice. So slow down. Anxiety has a major factor with this. Put the cultural thing aside. When we're uncomfortable and we're giving a public presentation, it's like our brain is saying, we need to get this over with as quick as possible. I don't want to be here. And that affects how we talk. So our rate goes up even faster. So we need to work on controlling that anxiety. Practicing with pause breaks already in there so that we can see it, that helps. But one of the tips that I've always really liked is to force myself to speak slower than I think I need to. I want it to be like my words are coming out as molasses. And I know that that seems counterintuitive to what I've just said, but you have to understand if I'm wired up and my anxiety is through the roof and I'm already going to be talking faster, if I force myself to talk as slow as I think I need to be, chances are I'm actually talking at the rate that I need to be. So that's something that can really help, especially with practice. So anxiety continued. I'd love to do this one with people here. So I'll do my best to try to demonstrate it at my seat here, but proxemics and the use of confidence poses. So for better, we're no longer in 2020 in the height of the pandemic, which is great, thank God. But what that means is we're going to be giving the majority of our presentations in person. And don't get me wrong, Zoom is great. And I'm so happy that I get to reach all of you amazing people more readily available this way than you all having to travel here on a 2 p.m. on a Friday. But you're losing that physicality component. So proxemics, put simply, is how your body moves in space and how it interacts with other people in your space. And there's all sorts of different communication theories where you can make use of space to your advantage, but we're not going to be talking about that. But I just like to throw that in because it is important. But you need to be able to own that space and to control that space. So confidence poses, act like a superhero, feel like a superhero. We're going to talk about Amy Cuddy a little bit more on the next slide. But Amy Cuddy is a linguistic scholar and theorist, and she coined the phrase confidence pose. She was able to say, well, if my body feels like it's in control, my mind is going to feel like it's in control. And one of the fun little exercises that she has her students do is these confidence poses. Think like superhero. So before she gives a presentation, she'll spend 2 minutes literally hands on her hips, feet shoulder width apart, chin up, like you're owning it. Batman, Superman, what have you. And it seems really silly, and believe me, it looks really silly if you see it, but it helps to signal to your brain that you're in control. You can also do the shake it out kind of thing before you go on. That works too. But all of this is your body is affecting your mind and your mind is affecting your body. Now, we want to control the room. So this is something that I unfortunately can't really demonstrate as well as I would like to over Zoom, but the rule of three when it comes to proxemics. So when you're giving a public presentation, chances are the audience is going to be in 3 zones. So you have zone 1 that's directly in front of you. You have zone 2 that is directly to your left, and zone 3 that's directly to your right. We don't want to get in the habit of only focusing on one zone because what ends up happening is the folks to our peripherals are going to suddenly feel like they're not a priority anymore. Chances are when that happens, the phone is going to come out. I'm going to check Instagram. I'm going to kind of tune out. So we want to pay the audience the respect that they deserve. So when we walk in that space, we walk to zone, 2, to zone 3, back to zone 1. There's just an air of confidence that happens when you're making that walk. You can even punctuate it and prepare for it in your speech. You can say, I'm going to talk about this on this side of the stage or room or what have you. And I'm going to talk about this on that side. So one, it helps to keep you on track. And two, it helps you to feel like you own your work. And one of the other things that I just wanted to throw in here that's not really to do with proxemics, but still has to do with anxiety is if you're asked a question. So if you recall, like I was saying with the cultural component of all of this, we're expected to know everything the second that someone asks it to us. We're conditioned for it almost. But what happens if we don't know the answer right away? Um, ah, you flounder a little bit. It increases the anxiety. Your heart starts to pump. You're using more filler words. It's not great. I can promise you that you will come across 10 times more of an effective and confident speaker if you do this as opposed to that. This being, that's a really great question. Unfortunately, I don't really have access to the data to give you that answer right this second. But if you give me a little bit of time, I'll consult with my colleagues. I'll get your contact information and I can get you that answer. I don't want to libel myself, it's important. Thank you. It's a great question. In the eyes of your audience and in the ears of your audience, you are going to come across as more approachable and you are going to come across as more competent. Trust me. So this is Amy Cuddy. It's a great quote from her. The last thing that I want to speak to with Amy Cuddy that I think is important that a lot of people are going to benefit from here is when I was doing my advanced public speaking training as part of my degree, we had to go through a bunch of TED Talks and critically evaluate the speakers and how they were engaging in their talks, engaging in the space, engaging with the audience. And we had to rate them, who's the best, who's the worst. Some of them were given to us. Like, here's an example of a really good TED Talk. Here's an example of a really bad TED Talk. And you know something? Amy Cuddy was the example for the really poor TED Talk. She did everything that you're not supposed to do. But what's funny is that I still got something out of that talk. It was impactful enough to me that I'm including her work in this presentation on how to communicate better to the general public. And I bring that up because we're all going to be anxious. We all are going to want to do the best job right out the gate. And sometimes we give ourselves more anxiety because we put this crazy pressure on ourselves. But understand that if the science is good and you're operating from a true place within yourself, the people that care are going to get something out of it. Now, that's not me saying keep bad habits and half-ass a presentation, excuse my French. No, but that is me saying that take some of the pressure off yourself and know that the things that matter will go across to the people that care. So confidence. We're going to talk about that as it relates to anxiety right now. Look at 4 heads instead of 2 eyes. I love to do this example when there's people here, so I'm going to try to impart it as best as I can to the camera. And you can tell me how it came across in the Q&A portion, but hi. So again, thank you so much for coming to this presentation. I'm making unbroken eye contact with you to show you that I respect you and that this presentation is important to me and you understanding it is important. In Western culture, eye contact is often seen as a really, excuse me for one second, the perks of being in the office. There's the office zone. Brittany's got it. Thank you very much. Just forgive that for one second. Yeah, so Western culture, right? We're drilled from an early age that if you're not giving someone eye contact, you're being disrespectful to them. So naturally, when you're giving a presentation, you're going to want to look people in the eye. Did you know, though, that in Eastern cultures and Asian cultures, eye contact is seen as disrespectful? It's part of the know before you go thing. My point is that if we were in person, we might be feeling some anxiety, we might be feeling a little uncomfy, might seem a little weird, and that might make our heart start to race a little bit. But you still want to give people the respect that they deserve, right? We're in the West, that's considered a respectful thing. So what do you do to mitigate that? Also, this is a really big component for people that are neurodivergent. Anyone that deals with something that's on the spectrum or has some sort of neurodivergency, eye contact is a difficult thing, and people struggle with it all the time. So what do? Well, you look at the forehead. You look directly above the eyes because you're still giving the impression that you're looking that person right there into their peepers, but you're not getting that anxiety. Now, the other thing that you are all going to experience once you start giving presentations to the public is these 3 types of faces. You're going to have the folks in the crowd that are like this. You're going to have folks that are like this. And you'll have folks that are like this. And I promise you, you're going to look at that third group of individuals and you're going to be like, why don't you like me? Don't you understand that this is important? What I have to say is important. I'm going to win you over. I swear, before this is over, I'm going to win you over. And you end up fixating on that person. And when you're seeing that you're not changing how they look, you're going to get more anxious and it's going to derail you. Focus on the people that are smiling. Focus on the people that look engaged. Everything else is going to fall into place. And then the last thing that I have to you about anxiety is the two golden rules. One is nobody knows, and two is face it till you make it. So nobody knows. Well, here's a little secret. People make mistakes. That's why there's erasers on pencils. We're going to make mistakes when we're giving a presentation to the public. But the secret is that the audience is only going to react as much as we react. If we treat it as a little hiccup, something that we can even poke fun at, it's going to make us look even more credible and even more smooth. And the audience isn't going to see it as nothing more than a small blip. But if we give into it and make it a big deal, the audience is going to make it a big deal. Furthermore, I want you to all think back for a second. Can any of you remember a time that you were anxious or nervous or you felt uneasy or sick to your stomach, especially when it comes to public speaking? Probably just about every single person in this Zoom call can recall multiple experiences of that. But now try to do that same exercise and think to when other people were nervous or anxious or sick to their stomach. It's a little bit harder, right? Sure, there might be some examples that you can think about, but think about how many folks you see on a given day. Chances are, if you're a little bit nervous, no one's going to know. Just own it. And that ties into the face it till you make it. So everyone's heard the fake it till you make it, but I'm not a fan of that. Imposter syndrome is real. Something that I deal with. It's something that I know a lot of people in the scientific profession deal with, public speaking, whatever. I want you to all know that none of you here are frauds. None of you here are fakers. You know your stuff. You own your stuff. You are, in some cases, the best at that stuff over anyone else. Words have power. We don't want to ever tell someone we're faking it through until things work out. No, 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 no. We're facing it. When we face our challenges head on and face our anxiety head on and do the thing that we need to do, yeah, it's going to be uneasy, but the more we do it, the better we'll be at it, the more skill we'll get at it. And heck, who knows, maybe you'll even be giving a presentation to a bunch of strangers talking about how this is an important deal. Trust me, it works. Okay. So with those general things out of the way, I want to get into the meat and potatoes of this, which is the actual communicating science portion. So I like this slide because I think that it encapsulates a bit of what we're talking about pretty well. So you have the guy wearing the collegiate cap, ratios and formula help people understand. And you have the general person, people need to know why and how to do a thing. The idea is that you need to be able to take the important collegiate thing and combine it into a way that the general public is going to understand. And the best way to do that is through common ground. So you'll notice that this is the only slide that I don't have some sort of cute or kitschy graphic behind, and that's because it's the most important. So far too often, scientists become gatekeepers of their own information. They're going to be using industry-specific terms, or maybe they'll get frustrated that how could the general public not know that this is important? They should care. Why don't they care? When people do this, at best, their audiences are going to tune out. At worst, they may actively reject and fight you on what you're trying to say. So you need to be able to get your audience to understand. You need to be able to convey that. You also need to know that in all honesty, the things that are really important about your work and about your research are almost definitely not going to be the things that are important to the general public. That doesn't mean that they're not valid. It doesn't mean that they're not important. It just means that to the everyday person, they're not going to see it that way. And that's okay. You see, you need to start your presentation and end your presentation with the things that you feel your audience is going to care the most about. Make it relevant to them. Put yourself in their shoes. In the middle, you're going to incorporate another component of the research that might not be as sexy, or interesting to still get that in there. But if you don't have them on the hook in the first place, they'll never be. And also remember that people really tend to only be able to focus on 3 new ideas at any given time. So I like to tell people, try to pick the 3 most important and relevant things about your work and craft your presentation about that. If there's some ancillary aside things that are relevant, throw that in the middle, but make sure especially that you're leading on something that's relevant in the beginning and for the close. So common ground continued. So how do you find common ground? Well, knowing and making educated guesses is more than half the battle. So I like the KKI approach. Know your audience demographic. So how old are the folks you're going to be talking to? What's going to be the average education level? What kind of professions are they working? Are they more white collar? Or are they blue collar? Things like that. Know where you're presenting and what the primary political side is. I hate that I have to put this in a presentation about communicating science because I would love nothing more than people to agree to disagree and see merit based on fact alone. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. So you need to be able to say to yourself, am I going to be talking to a more right-leaning audience, more left-leaning audience? All of that matters. And then next, you're going to identify the part of your presentation that touches on something important to the audience and use that as your way in. Well, how do you do that? Well, you're all scientists. Well, or aspiring scientists. You're all very educated folks. You're going to be making educated guesses, hypotheses. You're going to ask yourself questions based on what you know about the audience demographic and put yourself in their shoes. I know it sounds like an oversimplification, but really it is just that. And then you're able to say to yourself, well, how can I craft this to be appealing to them? I've watched the news. I've watched some political debates. I know that Republicans and older audiences have a tendency to favor things like family and financial security and preservation of way of life. Bet you there's a way I can incorporate that. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later. But what are words that work can help? So words that work, in case you didn't guess by the title of my presentation, I have affinity for this work. That's why I called it Words That Make Sense. But words that work, it comes from Dr. Frank Lutz. Now, some of the older folks might remember when the inheritance tax first came out, there was a phrase that went around saying they even tax you when you die. That's Dr. Frank Lutz. He was one of the first to realize that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And identifying that there's trigger words and buzzwords that can have some emotionally evoking consequences, and then using that to get people to buy in or buy out of something. Now, he's done a lot of work with politics on the right and the left, but there's another gentleman, Eric Eckel, who came along and saw Dr. Lutz's work and said, you know what? I can use that to help communicate climate change. That's exactly what he did. So I use this for Rally. Again, we're going to be going into the examples in subsequent slides, but what you're about to see is the direct result of his work. As a matter of fact, this is taken straight from the cheat sheet that they hand out at the Water Words That Work seminar. I was very fortunate that I actually got to attend one of those conferences, and it was world-changing. So when introducing your work, we want to use things like protect nature, control pollution. And you're going to see a theme with all of these, that these terms are almost kind of universally acceptable principles. They're not going to be something that's going to make someone say, oh, I don't agree with that. Chances are they're going to do the opposite. When explaining importance, we want to use things like future generations, family safety, financial stability, loss of industry. When we're trying to encourage people to act, we want to talk about things like making a difference. It affects you. Save money. Here's what you can do. That last one's really important. We need to give our audiences a conclusion to our work. We need to give them a roadmap to follow. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a couple of slides, but keep that in your head. When you're trying to ask for agreement to help establish that common ground, I want to talk about things like accountability, planning, freedom, investment. Corporations are bad, small businesses are good. You see how all of these are kind of those universal principles that everyone can agree on? Now, this is the shop talk that we're all so guilty of. And really, it's not anyone's fault. If you're in a collegiate environment, you need to communicate like a collegiate communicator. If you're in a highly technical lab-based environment, you need to talk like a scientist. Otherwise, you're not going to be taken seriously. It's the culture of it. But you have to understand that those words don't translate to the general public. They'll tune out, their eyes will glaze over. So we need to replace it. So don't use infrastructure and green infrastructure. Do use terms like water, clean water investments and pollution control investments. Don't use non-point source pollution. Do use polluted runoff, my favorite, hidden causes of pollution, or dirty stormwater. Don't use watersheds. This one's funny. You would be surprised the answers that we get when we ask people, do you know what a watershed is? Is that a shed that you put water in? That's not a reflection of someone being not intelligent or being dumb. It's a direct reflection of communicators not being able to impart this knowledge to them. Really, at brass tacks watershed, we're talking about what's upstream of us and what's downstream of us. And that's exactly how you communicate it. Don't use sustainable. This is another buzzword that we see all over the place that's going to potentially turn people off. We want to use things like responsible, balanced, environmentally friendly. This last one's kind of funny. Don't use tourism. Do use family tourism. If I say tourism, there's a very good chance that people in this area are going to think one thing, Benny's. And people around here don't like Benny's. So if we want to talk about tourism, especially considering that for most of the Jersey Shore, we are a tourism-based economy, we really want to look at the family component of it. We want to evoke images of a mom and pop sweet shop on the boardwalk selling to kids and families that have come down to visit the Jersey Shore. We don't want to invoke images of the hustle and bustle of New Yorkers coming in droves descending on us. So I just think that's something interesting. So tips to help your presentation stick with your audience. So narrative paradigm theory. When I was in college, I did my senior thesis on narrative paradigm theory and how stories about climate change affect people's perceptions about climate change. So what is narrative paradigm theory? Well, put simply, and getting the fancy words out of the way, it's just that a compelling story is going to persuade people 1,000 times more than empirical facts will. And there's two major components with it. There's narrative fidelity, which is, does the person speaking right now match what I think a credible speaker should be? Do they have the same values as me? Do they own the words that they're saying? Do they have the education level to talk about this kind of thing? Is that someone that I could see being a reputable source? I wouldn't worry so much about that for you all here right now. The one that I think is going to be quite of importance is narrative coherence. A story has to make sense. It has to have a beginning, it has to have a middle, and it has to have an end. If it doesn't, all heck is going to break loose and things are going to fall in on itself. We saw this in real time during the height of the pandemic with the development of the vaccines, because for so many, science is viewed as a historical process. Tests were done, hypotheses were made, data was collected, conclusions were drawn. Now we go from there. People aren't used to seeing science happen in real time. And when you have a theory that comes out and then another theory that contradicts that one, or this data is contradicting that data, or a spokesman is saying this 1 year and then 3 years later they're saying something completely different, to the average person, that looks like these people don't know what the hell they're talking about. How can I trust you if you've told me 3 different things in the span of 2 years? The key here is that even if you don't have a conclusion for your work, you need to give the audience a conclusion for your work. Give them a roadmap to follow. We're going to need more tests that we have to conduct on this, but assuming that they all go according to plan, it should validate this. Or so far, we're optimistic with the results here, and we think that we're finding good things about this proposal. I'm trying to speak off the cuff here and come up with examples, but I think that you can fill in the blank with whatever your work is. You just want to give them something that they can latch onto and say, okay, this wasn't a total waste of my time. It's not like they just spent 30 minutes talking to me about something and at the end said, well, we don't know. Give them something to follow. So everyone liked that really low res photo of me, clean shaven from college. I like it. That's why it's here. No, kidding. Rally, a case study. So I interned on the Rally for Barnegat Bay project, and that was a project all about non-point source pollution and how we can use community science as a means to help identify where this pathogen pollution is coming from, and then come up with a find it, fix it, no blame game solution for the towns to work on fixing those issues. I have no biology background. I don't have an environmental science background. I don't have a science background at all. My background is in PR, communication studies, and psychology. When I worked on this internship, my role was to take the incredible work that you folks all did and try to find a way to make it relevant to the people that I was going to be talking to. So how did I do that? Well, I used everything that I've told you about up until this point, and I used the words that work strategy. I used KKI. I said to myself, well, I'm going to be presenting here at the Eco Center in Toms River. I know that Toms River is primarily a very Republican area. I know that a good chunk of the folks that are going to be here are maybe older. It's definitely going to be a mixed education level, but there's probably going to be just as many high school grads as there are college grads. what do these people care about? Well, I've watched the news, I've watched political debates. I know that these kinds of folks really care about family, they care about money, they care about preservation of their way of life. How can I relate water quality and pathogen pollution to that? Well, for starters, I'm not going to call it pathogen pollution, that's for sure. What I did is I opened up talking about the ramifications that hidden causes of pollution have on you and your family's health. Not only does pathogen pollution put you and your family at risk, it also puts your financial security at risk. So many of the small businesses around here are shore-based economies. They depend on the influx of people coming in during the summer tourism season. If there's a beach closure or a waterfront closure, you're looking at loss of revenue, and that could make or break a small business. There's so many reasons to care about this, right? That's how I worked my way in. Then when I was giving the majority of the talk, that's when I brought up things like Entralet and IDEX systems and how we came up with the sampling sites. I threw in the pollution sniffing dog Remy because it introduced a little bit of levity and brevity. And then I ended with explaining to the audience why this matters, touching on the things that I knew mattered to them. I talked about how if towns were going to do this on their own, they more than likely would be getting caught up in red tape. It takes so much to snake a line with cameras to see if there's cracked pipes. You're actually able to facilitate real change where the towns might be having a hard time. And then you're able to take that data, give it to the towns, and then they could take it to the state and get a micro grant to fix it. Oh my God, that's amazing. No one's getting blamed. We're finding it, we're fixing it, we're making real progress. How often does that happen? And even though the project wasn't done, even though there was another 2 years left on the project, I still gave a roadmap of how things were going to go forward. So conclusions. So tips for better practice. So these are some things that have worked for me. They may work for you, they may not. Really, it's up to you to try to find the rhythm that's going to make a difference for you. So I like to, whenever I'm getting ready to do a presentation, I like to write it out. I like to include speaking breaks. I'm going to say I'm put a big pause here so I know to incorporate that pause. I write it all out or I type it all out. And then I read it verbatim 3 or 4 times out loud. And then I try to see if I can recite it just as I wrote it. If I get hung up, I look back at it, I reread that thing a couple of times, and then I go back at it. I do this until I feel like I'm 80% accurate in it. Really what it's doing is it's helping me to get comfortable with my own words so that if I did get off track at any point during the presentation and I had some rudimentary speaker aid with me, I could easily just look and be like, okay, I know where I am. Another one, record your speech with the phone's camera turned off. All you're going to do is listen to the audio. This is a big one that I learned about recently, and I love it. You're listening to just the audio. Am I using filler words? Am I saying right, yeah, you know, am I talking too fast? Am I talking like this? Am I talking too soft like this or too high? All of those things I'm making myself aware of. And then I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to record it, but I'm just going to do it with the video, no sound, so I can see what my mannerisms are. Am I pacing? Am I fidgeting with my hands? Am I stuck behind a podium? All of those things. And then I'm going to take the lessons that I've learned from those recordings and put it together and then give my presentation as close to how I would give it as if I was doing it real. And I try to incorporate this one and tell people about this one because you really want to give a proper dry run. You don't want to just be doing it in your bedroom in your PJs looking at a camera because that's not how you're going to be presenting it. By doing it in the space within reason, I'm not saying, try to get early access to someplace, but within reason, give it how you feel like you would be giving that presentation when it's time to do it. You'll then be able to say, okay, is there any technical things that I need to worry about? Where can I move to? Am I going to still be facing the camera if I'm off here? As a matter of fact, I did this just now, 30 minutes before we got on and did the Zoom talk here. I wanted to make sure that everything was out of the way because the last thing that you want is to be all ready to give the presentation and then a curveball comes out of left field and now you have to adapt on the fly. All that's going to do is increase anxiety. And then the last thing, I went a little out of order here, but plan on rehearsing at least 3 times. So you see that 3 again. Obviously, if you can rehearse and practice more, that's going to be helpful, but at least a minimum of 3 is going to help to give you an edge when it comes to being comfortable with your work. So why does all this matter? Well, a well-informed scientific communicator is priceless. Whether it's in your undergrad, graduate school, or especially in your professional career, one of the most important things there is to learn how to communicate effectively. You think your boss is going to want to see a 5-page report that could be summed up in a paragraph? Absolutely not. And you think that you're going to be able to get the promotion or the funding that you need or the buy-in that you need from your colleagues if you can't communicate your ideas? No way. The other thing that you need to remember is that sometimes it doesn't matter why a person buys in. All that does matter is that they buy in, because you can always work on changing those opinions and those feelings later. But if you are dead on arrival, you're dead on arrival. And the last thing that I like to tell people is that if you don't know how to ask for what you want, you are never going to get what you want. And I'll even throw it in, get what you deserve, because all of you folks here are amazing. That's why you're here listening to this presentation, to try to get more comfortable with this stuff. And I'm so proud and honored to be able to talk to you. With all of this, I'm going to be around for some Q&As. I have some additional resources that I can provide. But thank you all so much for coming and for listening. And with that, I'm going to give it to Brittany.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alec, for your wonderful presentation. Last time I checked the chat, there was no questions written in, but does anybody on the call have any questions? I can't see everybody, so just unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, my name is Bianca. What
Yeah.
do you do when you cannot gauge your audience? Or when you realize that you made a mistake, that, when you did your rally and you're like, oops, there's the one completely other person. How do you prepare for that? Kind of, is that your secret second hand kind of in your other back pocket? Or like, what do you do?
So that's a really, yeah. So first off, thank you so much for asking a question. I appreciate it. And thanks for coming on camera. And it's a really good question. So while there is merit in trying to create a plan B, C, all the way to Z, we don't want to plan for failure. And more often than not, we create situations in our head that are far worse than they would be in actual real time. So not being able to identify your demographic beforehand, I could see that being a thing. I think that more often than not, you're going to at least have a little bit of heads up, even if it's at the 11th hour, but that's okay. Because as you give the presentation, you're going to start to kind of see by looking around the room how things are going to be perceived by your audience. If you just went off and talked about, something and people seem to be like way more in agreement and are interested, maybe lean with that side of the presentation. And it all comes back to how well you know what you're talking about. And I'm sure all of you do know that very well. So I'm sure if you were at a dinner party or if you were out to dinner with friends and the topic of your work came up, you could probably talk about it in 10 or 12 different ways. So you have that ability to pivot. So by watching your audience and seeing what's working and what's not working, you can pivot on the fly. And I know that that sounds scary, but again, we don't want to plan for defeat, because then we have in our head, oh my God, things are going to go wrong. More often than not, things go right. And to the other point, if you make a mistake, that's okay. As long as you just own it. I give you a perfect for instance. I was giving a talk at one of the senior clubs in Seaside, and I thought that I needed to be there for a certain time, and I got there and I couldn't find the place, and the person that I was supposed to call wasn't answering the phone. So I get in there, and now all of a sudden I'm trying to get my projector set up and all of this, and the speaker has already introduced me, and I'm over here freaking the heck out. Yeah, it was anxiety inducing. I got up, then there was more technical difficulties. The mic didn't want to work. My projector is starting to fall off to the side. I went up there, and this is what I did. I said, thank you so much for your patience. As you can see, I moonlight as an improv comic on the weekends, but again, I appreciate you. And I let it go. If you just let that stuff roll off your shoulder, the audience is going to let it roll off your shoulder. You're going to feel more confident, and that's going to help you to observe what's going on around the room. So that's, some of the best advice that I can give. The other thing too is don't be afraid to do a Google search. You could quite literally just be like political affiliations or demographic, you can get some of that information from Google as well. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Excellent question, Bianca. Anybody else? Let me check the chat one more time. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. I'll give it another minute to see if someone wants to unmute and ask, or if they're typing up their question in the chat. But if there are no other questions, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Again, this presentation was part of our student grant program to try to highlight our student grant program, which happens in the summer. We pay students to do research and present their findings from research that they are looking into in Barnegat Bay. So we are very excited. Applications are open, and they are ending end of March. So check out our check out our social medias for more information and updates about that. We're looking forward to the round of applications coming in. And if you know anybody who would like to apply, let us know. Alec, do you want to give your contact information if anyone has any questions after?
Yeah, absolutely. So I get it. You know, sometimes things come to mind after the fact, or if you just want to talk to me, I'm a cool guy. I like to talk to people. You can reach me at my email. It's all lowercase, all one word. As a matter of fact, Brittany, if you want to type it in the chat, that would be great. It's outreach@savebarnegatbay.org. So that's me. There's so much more on this topic that I couldn't add in a 45-minute presentation. You could literally spend a whole day with it. But I have some great resources, both for helping to control anxiety, but also different communication strategies and tips. There's some really good stuff. So if anyone is interested or would like to learn a little bit more about some of these theories, I'd be more than happy to share it. I love getting to talk about this stuff. It's one of my favorite things in the world. So seriously, if anyone has any questions or wants any of that information or any of those references, just shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to provide it.
Can I add a question before we
Of
dismiss?
course, absolutely.
Do you have any tips on how to talk to kids as opposed to adults, or how to engage kids? I mean, obviously, I have children on my own. I know how to talk to children, but it's different when, yeah, do you have? I feel like what you were presenting, which was awesome, was more geared towards adults, and I found it very helpful. But I've also found myself in the situation of trying to engage children, and that is, I was a little out of my water there.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And truthfully, it's something that I deal with too. Sometimes I'll be out at an outreach festival and I'll be talking to some teenagers or adults and everything's going great. And then a kid comes up and is looking at the display, and I don't want to ignore the child. I want to engage with the kid, but how do you do that, right? Well, one, embrace your silly side. Kids love to laugh. Kids don't really take things serious. If you can inject humor into your work in any way, do that. If you can make fun of yourself, add a little bit of self-deprecating humor, that helps. Kids love that. A lot of what I'm talking about with trying to translate your work into more generally understandable concepts is going to help with that, because you're already doing half the battle. So if I had a really technical concept and then I translated that into something that a general audience can do, then I can just take that, and then that's even easier to distill down for something that's going to be acceptable for a kid. So that's something to keep in mind too, because if you're already prepping your presentation like that, then you're just basically doing what you did one more time to get it to a lower age demographic. But again, the humor, don't be you're going to feel embarrassed because kids can be brutal and can, like, really, no one is going to sink your day more than a child will, because I think the saying goes, there's only 3 types of honest people in the world: people that are mad, people that are drunk, and children. So they'll really lay into you, but that's okay. Be fun, be silly, put yourself out there, take what you've already distilled, distill it down a little bit more. And that other tip that I gave you about looking at how the audience is reacting, there might be a part of the work or the presentation that you're giving that a kid's ears perks up with. Maybe you were talking about nature or the woods and animals. That came up. Like, for example, when I was doing the presentation with Rally, one of the key components was a specially trained pollution sniffing dog. Her name was Remy, and she actually smelled the samples and was able to go out into the public, and using her nose was able to find where there might be sanitary sewage pollution and sit down within like a square yardage. The second that you bring in the dog, the second that you brought in that, you watched all the younger folks and the older folks perk up like, oh, that's pretty neat. So pay attention, right? Be aware of how your audience is reacting to what you say. If you're loose, and relaxed with it and not afraid to be a little silly or, potentially make mistakes. Because remember what I said about mistakes, no one's going to react to it unless you react to it. That's okay. You're not perfect. That's why we have I'm going to grab a pen. That's why we have erasers on pencils, right? All of that's going to help.
I actually have something to add to that. I am not a professional communicator like Alec, but I do work with kids a lot and do communicate science with kids a lot of many different age levels. And something that I found really successful was asking a lot of questions and relating things back to their experience. So kids are very, very observant. So especially if we're doing a program out in nature, I like to ask very basic questions that can relate to the topic we are going to learn about and just see how they feel, what they relate to, what they already know. And then from there, that's how I draw the rest of the presentation out. So I find a lot of success with that. And kids like to be engaged, especially younger kids, love to answer questions. They love to talk and they love to ask questions as well. So kind of going with the flow and bouncing off of them, I find pretty helpful in the presentations I've done with younger kids and even a little bit older.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's stellar. That's gold tier for sure. And again, it goes back to the common ground thing. So, but yeah, Brittany's absolutely right. Just to ask questions and watch and be amazed about how much these kids actually know. So.
Okay.
Awesome. So if we don't have any other questions, we can end it here. Again, thank you all so much for joining us. Alec's email is in the chat. You can talk to him about communication things, ask him any questions, anything also Save Barnegat Bailey related. If you want to learn more about our organization or things we're working on, you can message Alec at outreach@savebarnegatbay.org, or not communication and Save Barnegat related, you can also email me at assistant@savebarnegatbay.org. But yes, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate you coming.
And I just want to add one other thing too. You can also DM us on Instagram or Facebook Messenger. I manage our feeds there, so I'll see that too if that's easier for you. And don't be afraid to come and pay us a visit. We're located at 117 Haynes Road in Toms River. Our eco center is awesome. We're actually in the process of updating it and making it even more awesome. And we're sitting on some beautiful trails in the river right behind us. And stay tuned because we've got some really cool events coming up to get people out into nature. So monitor the feeds and stay abreast of those updates because there's some really cool ones and we got some really cool stuff coming out. But again, thank you all from the bottom of my heart for listening to the presentation, for asking such awesome questions. And like I said, if anyone has any other questions, I'm always reachable. So thank you again. You guys are great. And I hope you have an awesome weekend. It looks like we've got some beautiful weather. So have a good one, guys. Thank you.
Really great presentation, Alec and Brittany. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.